This is a continuation of part 8 of the Mechanical Raid Team guide, and again I will be looking at Nauseous Rotbone. Why have I decided to look at him again? Well, this map is so radically different to the previous map that I looked at that I thought it would be worth examining in its own right. And the conditions are fairly similar in terms of the difficulty of the enemies. So before I was looking at a map for a legendary 4 Rotbone, this one is a map for a legendary 5 Rotbone. So this is going to be slightly more difficult just in terms of the health and, well, the stats of the boss himself and the ads, but aside from that it should be quite similar. Now there's one very obvious difference you'll notice if you've seen the previous video between the teams that I'm using, and here I'll be using Rayvas. And that is because on the previous map you start within a stone's throw of the Poxwalkers. It's actually very easy to kill them all early on and get a lot of summons spawned as well to really start clogging up the board with your units. That obviously is not the case here. And in fact, if you don't use any characters with Overwatch, unless you're using someone with 5 movement, which obviously you don't want to be using with the mechanical team, you can't attack any of these ads in the first turn without using Overwatch, which is exactly what Rayvas is here to do, is to provide Overwatch in the first turn to take out a couple of Poxwalkers, and then also because she spawns her drones when she uses her active ability, they'll then immediately be able to start moving around and attacking at the beginning of the second turn, and hopefully maybe take out a third Poxwalker. It's important to get the Poxwalkers out of the way because you really want to be focusing on these Blightlord Terminators. They have a lot of health, they have a lot of armor, they can be revived by Rotbone, and he can revive them with 5,000 health. So cutting through them is extremely difficult, and the last thing you want is, let's say, to be healing a character with Actus to try and get them to attack a Terminator, only to have them turn around and attack a Poxwalker instead. Or just in general, you want your characters to be able to move to very specific locations, and it may not be easy to do that if the map is clogged up with Poxwalkers again. So here, very important to start taking out the Poxwalkers ASAP, which is what the Overwatch is for, as I said. So I'm talking about carving through the Terminators. In this map, it's essentially impossible to separate them from Rotbone unless you sacrifice maybe a couple of turns early on to start separating them from him, and I really don't want to do that. I just want to be killing them, getting them out of the way ASAP so that I can start focusing on Rotbone and start manipulating him into moving exactly where I want him to get the most damage on him. So I'll be going all out on the Terminators, which means trying to group them together so that Ro can get through both of them, so you can move into position next to one, kill one with its passive, move into its space, and then still be able to attack the other one, essentially. I also want to be able to get through their health pools even if Rotbone is able to revive them. And I'm going to be assuming that Rotbone is going to be reviving them because it happens 75% of the 75% of the time, which for all intents and purposes may as well be 100% of the time for how it affects battles. Also, I want to be making sure I finish them off no matter what, because Rotbone's active ability heals essentially 7,000 health for Chaos units. That means that if I'm sort of almost killing both of them, I'll have essentially all of my work undone if Rotbone uses his active ability in between them. So they have 8,000 health and he can restore 7,000 health. So basically I could spend all of my first turn attacking them, nearly killing both of the Terminators, and then he can just come along and say, sod you, and undo all of my work in one use of his active. which would leave me in a very sticky situation. So again, this is not an easy fight, there are a lot of things to consider, but I think at least I managed to figure out a way to address all of these problems. So I'll just start with positioning my characters and the spore mine, and it's important that I've put the spore mine here. The reason for that is I don't want a drone from Ravas to be spawned here, so I put the spore mine in place first to stop that from happening. I'm expecting the Terminators, when they move forward, to either move to this spot and this spot, or this spot and this spot. And what I want to happen is for this spore mine to fly over to them and explode next to both of them. And it will do a little bit of damage, sure, but the main thing that I really want is for it to remove the protection of their Terminator armor, which will make it a lot easier for my characters to then finish them off in the rest of the turn, even if they're being revived by Rotbone. So that's the idea here, and then I'll just use Ravus' active. It's a case of waiting for the Poxwalkers and getting a couple of kills on them. The important thing with Ravus also is to not move her up too far, because the Blightlord Terminators move before the Poxwalkers, and they have their Terminator armor trait, and a hell of a lot of health, and a hell of a lot of armor, and a resilient trait. So the chances of Ravus' Overwatch killing one of these guys, especially at this level, is 0. It's just not going to happen. So the last thing you want is Ravus using her Overwatch on the first Terminator that moves, and then her Overwatch being spent. That Terminator gets healed up, so it doesn't make any difference anyway, and then you won't be able to kill any Poxwalkers. So you could move her up and think maybe, oh, I'll kill all the Poxwalkers in this turn. In reality, that won't happen at all. So it's best just to make a bit of a compromise and just accept the fact that you'll only be able to kill 2 of them with her Overwatch, which is more than enough for what I'm going to be doing. It would have been nice if this Poxwalker died as well, but ultimately it won't make any difference as well. Now what I'm going to be doing in this turn is burning a lot of active abilities. So I'm going to be burning Rose active and using Actus's active as well. And you might think, that's a bit of a waste. And in most situations I would agree that using those abilities this early is a waste. You really want to be using Rose active later on in most battles when you have Tan in Conqueror mode, providing lots of extra attacks via that, and you have a lot of mechanical summons on the battlefield as well, to really get the most attacks possible out of Ro, whilst he's doing that a great deal of extra damage. Of course though, in this battle, you're facing a boss adjutant, and the boss adjutant takes 66% reduced damage, so although you can deal a good chunk of damage to the boss just through sheer firepower, the bulk of the damage you'll be doing is through the health loss mechanic, which you'll be able to deal up to 90,000 damage per turn if you manage to attack him 15 times separately, which will far outstrip any damage that you can do directly to the boss, unless you have some super duper massively damaging power-up that team setup that I'm not aware of. But in reality, Rose active, even if you use it at the optimal time, it's not going to be doing a huge amount of damage, so it's not actually that important to use against the boss, but it can really help you kill these Blightlord Terminators quickly, and killing them quickly allows you to start getting 15 attacks per turn on Rotbone a lot quicker, which ultimately will provide you with a lot more damage over the course of the battle than trying to wait for the perfect opportune moment to use Rose active. And as it turns out, if I hadn't used Rose active here, I almost certainly wouldn't have been able to take out both the Blightlord Terminators in this turn, but I do. So I move Eldron into position and I take out the Poxwalker, and of course I get a little bit of splash damage onto the Terminator as well, but that's not really important. And then I move Ro here. And the reason for moving Ro there is quite simple. It's just, I'm going to be having Tan here, Actus here, so I can't really have him in this sort of area, and I'm going to have Ravas here as well. So these 3 hexes are all kind of verboten for him, So I've put him here where he can still attack this Terminator, but he's sort of out of the way of everyone else. Of course, Eldron being here as well, he now has every single one of the boss ads that are still alive doomed as well, which is what I really want. And I've chosen to attack this Terminator first because it's on the low ground. So if Rotbone revives it, he revives it with 5,000 health, and he'll revive either one of these Terminators with 5,000 health. But of course, if the Terminator is on the low ground, then I'm getting 50% bonus damage against it. So the bonus health that Rotbone provides with his revive will be less effective on this Terminator here, just because it's taking that 50% extra damage. So that's my rationale for attacking this Terminator first. I just want to kill it as quickly as possible, get Rotbone to use his passive as quickly as possible, and he can only use that once per turn. So once that's used, it can't be used again, and I don't have to worry about it. And hopefully it won't take me too long to get through the health pool of this Terminator. Especially seeing as Ro, when you use his active, he deals 4 direct damage hits, and they're all being boosted by Doom. So that should deal a really hefty chunk of damage to this Terminator. And you can see I got, I think, either 3 or 4 crits there, which I actually kind of worried me for a moment, because I didn't want to manage to overkill this Terminator somehow. Because if I'd overkilled it and it hadn't been revived, then Ro would be standing over here, and he's already moved this turn, so then he wouldn't be able to move over to attack this Terminator. Obviously the aim of the game here is to kill this low ground Terminator with Tan or one of my other mechanical characters, so that Ro uses his passive to then move into its place after it has been killed. So yeah, that is something to be careful of here. Just a very lucky crit chain. Really wasn't expecting that to happen, but thankfully the Blightlord Terminator still survived, and even if it had died, there was still a 75% chance of it being revived. So this might be something to worry about on lower difficulties, where maybe Ro would be able to kill this Blightlord outright, but in that situation you probably wouldn't need to be using his active this early anyway, if it's that easy to kill these boss ads. So not something I'd really worry about, but this is just funny there. I really wasn't expecting that, and my butt clenched a bit. So now I've attacked the Terminator with Tan, and something unexpected happened there. So I didn't realise that if the Blightlord gets revived, you won't get the follow-up hit from Ro on it. But this is actually not a problem still, because I can activate Tan with Tacticus active, and he'll attack the Terminator from high ground and nearly kill it, and then Ro will definitely finish it off. And of course, if Ro's active hadn't done a lot of damage in the first turn, if say the Blightlord Terminator had been left with half of its health, it still would definitely have been killed off in after Tan attacking it, either by Tan's damage or by Ro then hitting it with his passive ability. So there's essentially no hope for this Terminator here in this situation. It is going to die no matter what. So I deliberately used Tan's attack there rather than healing him with Actus, and that's important because I'll be using Actus's active to chain a bunch of attacks on these Terminators to guide Ro through them and get him killing both of them in one go. So Actus's active ability is now ready to be used. And there's an important thing to understand about Actus's active ability, which I have sort of talked about in a video a long time ago, but you probably haven't seen that, so I'll just go over it here. And that is that Actus's ability, when you have, it decides the order in which the characters affected by the ability attack in, characters or summons, it follows the same rule as Tan's Skitari deployment. So it will start at the 12 o'clock position and then move around clockwise. So I know that when I use Tacticus active, the first one of my units to attack when triggered by it will be Tan. So Tan will attack this Terminator. And then Ro will obviously attack the Terminator as well. So that will finish the Terminator off, and then Ro will move into the position where the Terminator is currently standing. The next thing to be triggered by Actus's ability will be this shield drone, which will kill off this Poxwalker, which I want to happen. So that's good, and it also means that Ravas, when she is then triggered by Actus, she won't attack this Poxwalker, she will instead attack this Terminator. And then, of course, when she attacks the Terminator, Ro is standing on the low ground position where the other Terminator is. So Ro will then attack this Terminator, this one on the high ground with his passive, and finish it off. And even if he doesn't finish it off, Ravas is still yet to attack with her normal attack. So she'll have attacked after being triggered by Actus, but she'll still have an attack left. So even if this Terminator survives, she'll be able to attack it again, and Ro will certainly finish it off at that stage. Another thing that's important to do with using Ro's active early is that you'll notice that when he attacks with his passive ability, when he has his active online, he'll deal 2 hits, and then there's a slight pause, and then he'll deal the 2 direct damage hits. And this is actually important, because they're almost treated sort of like separate attacks, but not quite. So the damage from his first 2 hits will do energy damage, and that will do however much damage to his target. And then the direct damage hits will come in after that. And the reason this is important is against resilient enemies. So the first 2 hits will deal however much damage to a resilient enemy. And say that brings them down to 1 HP. Because of their resilient trait, it stops him from killing them outright. But then you have the 2 hits from the direct damage come in, and they're not sort of counted in with the first 2 hits. So those will then finish off the target. So say a target has 5,000 health, and Ro's combined passive with the active ability hits on top of it will do 5,000 damage. If it was just treated as one attack, it'll do 10,000 damage. So if it's treated as just one attack, it'll do 10,000 damage. The Terminator has 5,000 health left, so let's just say that it doesn't manage to overkill the Terminator, so the Terminator survives. Now let's think of it being applied in 2 parts, so maybe 8,000 damage for the first 2 hits, and then 2,000 for the direct damage. Just made up numbers here. So the 8,000 damage doesn't quite kill the Terminator, but it brings it down to 1 health. And then the extra 2,000 damage afterwards is more than enough to then finish the Terminator off, and that's essentially how this works. So it's really good for dealing with resilient enemies like these Blightlord Terminators, which again is another reason for using it early, just to make sure I kill them quickly and efficiently, so I can start manipulating Rotbone as soon as possible. So now this is all going to play out very quickly, so I'm just going to set the speed to normal, and it will all be quite obvious what's happening. So, Terminator gets killed, Ro moves into its position, Ravas gets triggered, and you see those first 2 hits don't kill the Terminator, but then the extra direct damage from Ro's active then finishes it off. And of course Rotbone has no ability to revive at this point, so both Terminators get killed in that one use of Actus's active. So that's all well and good. So I still have Ravas's attack left, so I will use it on Rotbone to get a couple of hits in on him in this turn. Now what I want to do is manipulate Rotbone so he moves onto low ground. So the idea is to sort of surround him and then force him to attack a spore mine where the only place he can move to attack it from is on the low ground. So I put a spore mine here. The only place that Rotbone can move to attack the spore mine is this hex. Now, Ravas's drones, they like to stay within 2 hexes of Ravas. When they're within 2 hexes of Ravas, they'll act like any other kind of melee summon, where they'll just get close to the enemy and attack it. If they end up more than 3 hexes, but if they have to travel more than 3 hexes away from, somewhere more than 2 hexes away from Ravas, they'll prefer to not actually do that. They'll prefer to stay near to her instead and protect her. So what I want is for Rotbone to end up close to Ravas so that her drones attack Rotbone, rather than Rotbone ending up somewhere over here, somewhere, so that, which would then mean that her drones stay next to her, don't attack Rotbone. I won't be getting any extra hits from Ro as a result of that. And it also means that it'll be harder to surround Rotbone and sort of corral him in the direction I want him to move in the next turn. So by baiting him over here, I'll have the shield drones moving here and here to attack him, which will get me extra hits out of Ro's passive, and it will also mean that he'll then be surrounded on 4 sides out of 6, which is a very good springboard for me to then almost fully surround him and sort of bait him to move to where I want him to go. So I want him to move onto this low ground position. Obviously, there's no point trying to get him onto this low ground, because trying to get your summons to move somewhere sensible is always a battle, and one which you won't win. So I have 2 options open to me at this point. I can put a spore mine here, or I can put a spore mine here. If I put a spore mine here, then I just have to keep this hex blocked off, and then he'll move onto the low ground. But I decided to put one here. It's just no particular reason for that. You know, maybe it was an inferior choice, but it's just how I chose to do things. So maybe in hindsight, I'll have a little look at this and change my tune, but that's what I decided to go with. So I'm predicting for Rotbone to be in this hex in the next turn. So having Ro here is good, because he can hit Rotbone in this turn and after he moves over here as well, and he'll have the high ground bonus against Rotbone after he moves. Of course, with Eldrion here, he's also covering Rotbone with Doom in this turn, and he'll be covering him in the next turn. And Tan will be spawning a Skitarius here and a Skitarius here in this turn, as these are the only 2 open hexes around him. So all of that means that Rotbone will be surrounded on all sides around here. There'll be a Skitarius here, the Skitarius here, and Ravas here, and then a spore mine here. So that all of that is basically just funneling him into this hex. And as you see, he can't resist taking the bait, and at this point this battle is essentially finished in terms of tough thinking. The start of these battles is always the most difficult, but once you get to this stage where you can just surround them and start pummeling them, it's really very simple. So doing the usual heal with Actus first, so that I can then switch to Conqueror mode, because I've got 5 Skitari out. And it's just plain sailing from here, really. I am expecting Rotbone to start attacking my drones. I didn't think he'd be able to kill them in one attack, but he does nearly kill one of my drones. So what I might have been more sensible doing here was moving Ravas out of melee with Rotbone now, and using the Biovores active to put a spore mine here. And by putting the spore mine there, Rotbone would prefer to hit that out of all of the targets around him, which would then mean that there wouldn't be any risk of my shield drones dying, and Rotbone would just be continuously distracted by me using the Biovores active to put a Spore Mine in melee with him. So that is one thing I could have changed. There's also the annoying question of this Skitarius here, and I saw that he was on low ground, so I thought, oh, he's going to move on to high ground, but because there's a high ground hex here, here, and here, there's nothing I can really do to stop him from moving out of this position, so I just kind of gave up on the idea of keeping the Skitarius in position, and I thought, you know what, I've still got the shield drone next to Tan, and 2 other Skitari, and that's kind of enough for me. That's easily enough to get enough attacks per round to do my 15 attacks and get all of that lovely bonus damage from the boss adjutant ability on Rotbone. So if I miss out on a couple of extra attacks per turn at this point, it doesn't really matter. But again, that's maybe something to look at in the future, if I can keep this Skitarius next to Tan, so that Tan can trigger 4 extra attacks per turn. But yeah, I see the jeopardy that the shield drone is in now, so I move Ravas over there. And then I use the Biovores active just to keep Rotbone's attention focused on attacking Spore Mines rather than finishing off that drone. Because obviously the drone is important because it can trigger Rose passive. The more triggers I get of Rose passive, the better, of course. But yeah, just the finishing touches now. And just treating Rotbone like a punching bag essentially. And at the end of the day, it's nearly half of his health, so I'm quite happy with that. I think I will end the recording here.